Hi, and thank you all for joining us today for a conversation on maintaining donor engagement in a time of crisis. My name is Kevin Bitterman, and I am the Director of Institutional Advancement and Partnerships with Theater Communications Group, the National Service Organization for Theater, where we are working to lead for a more just and thriving theater ecology. I'd like to remind everyone that today's session is being live captioned and ASL interpretations are being provided by Brandon and Manny. Sarah, my colleague from TCG, will be dropping information into the chat to talk about the access instructions. And we ask that you please let us know if there are any other access needs that we should incorporate into our time together today. And to continue with my own captioned intro, I'm a white man with longer brown hair these days. I'm wearing a blue shirt and I use he, him pronouns. And I'm really grateful to share this professional affinity space with you all today. While TCG is based in New York City, I'm actually joining you from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, on the ancestral land of the Tutelo, the Saponi, the Catawba, and the Kiawe tribes. I'm going to ask you each to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, indicating your name, your organization, your affiliation, or any other identifier you wish to share. We have, I believe, over 100 people registered for today's call, which is being recorded, and an even larger number of practitioners who have asked to see the archived video later this week after we have our conversation today. We're going to move into the presentation from our panelists now, and after that, we'll open the screen up for us to have a discussion together. To participate in that discussion, we're going to ask that you use the raise hand function by going into the panelist, or I'm sorry, the participant list on the bottom of your screen and click the raise hand button. We kindly ask that you stay muted throughout the conversation. However, please feel free to use the chat function to either respond to what your panelists are saying or asking any questions, but we do ask that you keep chatter back and forth to a minimum so that it doesn't distract anyone or take away from your fellow attendees' experience today. With this said, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Caitlin Green, who serves as the Client Engagement Officer with TRG Arts. TRG has been a presenter at many TCG national conferences and convenings over the years. And Caitlin, in particular, has worked closely with TCG as we've established a cohort program for theaters exploring single ticket cultivation strategies and also ways to increase their loyalty and engagement with their donors. Today, Caitlin, I'm happy to hand the mic to you, and I just want to thank you for your support and your leadership and your partnership along the way. So with that, Caitlin, take us away.
Thank you. I will happily take that here. I'm going to share my screen. It is my pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you, TCG, for giving us this space. Thank you to the 100 or more of you that are joining this room and giving us your time and participation and thought partnership and all of the great things you bring to the table. It is my pleasure here to introduce my co-panelists, 3 extraordinary development directors from 3 very different extraordinary organizations. Jamie Clements from the Alliance Theater, Letitia Ellerson from True Colors Theater, and Jamie Herlick-McElwain from Seattle Rep. So we are nearly coast to coast here in your panelists and certainly representing all of you. So thank you to my panelists for joining me. I'm stealing the reins here for a moment, but I promise you will hear from all of them shortly. Our goal here today is to share several different things with you. We're going to share data. I'm here from TRG. It can't possibly be a surprise that I'm coming with some data. So we'll share some high-level data. I will share high-level data. My colleagues will share data from their perspective and results from their organizations. We're also going to share some provocations. We'll ask some questions. We've got polls, so get ready to participate there. We will probably share in some commiseration. If you're feeling that that's something that is helpful in this moment, you will find a willing participant, an empathetic participant in that commiseration here. And we're also here to provide inspiration. So I hope that you walk away from today with at least a couple of those boxes ticked. All right, from there, I'm going to jump into really a better introduction of my colleagues. So if each of you would please take yourselves off mute for just a second and talk about a win and a challenge that you've had recently so you can set the stage and get people thinking. Let's, Jamie Clements, would you kick us off here?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone from rainy Atlanta. Glad to be with you all today. We at the Alliance Theater here in Atlanta have, like everyone else, been on a seemingly roller coaster ride of scenarios and changes and starts and false starts and restarts on everything. But to boil down some of the wins and challenges that we've had, wins, I think our major donors are more engaged than they have been in quite a while. Many of them jumped on board in March and April with some emergency funding to make sure that the theater survived our fiscal year, which closed May 31, and weathered the summer storm that we all kind of knew was coming. And so that's a big win of people raising their hands and saying, yes, we're with you. Even if we can't physically be with you, we want you to thrive right now. Challenges have been a lot of what this whole session is about, which making real connections with some of the programs that we had just started, like monthly Sustainer Society donors, which we had monthly in-person gatherings for. It's been difficult to keep the energy and excitement around getting together virtually like we're doing today on what I'm sure is your first Zoom this month. And so that's kind of a teaser for the wins and challenges we've seen. So how about you, Letitia?
Thanks, Jamie. I'm in rainy Atlanta as well. Keisha Ellerson at Kenny Leon's True Colors Theater Company. So we've had several wins actually really coming from the corporate and the foundation area that helped us sustain our relationships that we built from that. Have been definitely helpful. But just in general, I would have to, just going through my challenges, really stems from being a Black woman serving a predominantly Black audience. So who we are at True Colors, our audiences are the main entities that and individuals and communities that are being plagued with this health crisis, this pandemic. And so here we are trying to serve a community that is struggling right now. And so in the beginning of the pandemic is really where I'm coming from with this challenge here. I had to figure out how in the world am I supposed to engage with our patrons on a human level, right? In a way that's genuine, in a way that feels right for me as an individual, as a person who actually had family members who were in the hospital going through COVID as well too. And so how can I, from a human level, be able to connect with individuals and whatever they are going through, wherever the spectrum is. And so coming from that standpoint, I was able to develop a campaign that helped us with our marketing, as well as the development, a fundraising campaign that pitch and make us be able to start our Giving Tuesday Now efforts. And really that campaign, I'll talk a little bit more later on in this conversation, but it was entitled We Are the Magic. And the We Are the Magic really stemmed from not just True Colors being magical, it's really about our community is magical. We bring magic when we are connected with one another, and how can we continue to stay connected with one another virtually so that we can have that sense of community. And so coming from that place, I was able to rise from the ashes of whatever my despair and what I was going through personally as well too, into a win that was able to be translated to our patrons, people who are subscribers to donors as well too. Jamie, toss it up to you. What about you?
Thank you, Letitia. Hi from Seattle, the other corner of the country. I'm sitting outside in the sunshine, trying to take advantage. So I think I'll start with, I feel like there are many challenges. I'm sure you all are in the same boat, but I really tried to think about my challenges as it relates to the donor engagement element. And the challenge for me, quite frankly, was the real understanding and recognition that without performances we're really missing a lot of our passive touch points, passive to fundraising, I should say, with that I had really, quite frankly, taken for granted. Not only were people not coming to our space and seeing the mission in the flesh, but they're also not receiving programs that have a lot of information in them and that they take away with them oftentimes and leave in their cars or leave on their coffee tables, and are reminded of the theater on a really regular and consistent basis. Also, I realized that we have very little, while we have a very strong brand and some amazing content, delivering it all by email and in the digital sphere is exactly how everyone is delivering content right now. So I'm really feeling the loss of differentiation, and quite frankly, a lot of donors are just shutting down and not looking at their emails anymore. So those things I would say are my challenges on the donor engagement part of things. The wins on the flip side are that we've really been brainstorming new ways to address that. And two of those ways, one are virtual events. We've created some virtual events that we never might have been able to do in the past when we were thinking so much more about in-person engagement. And we are sending to print our first ever printed donor newsletter. We're delivering both of those engagement opportunities to donors of all levels, which feels really exciting to me too. One of the things we've talked about for a long time is the value of exclusivity versus the opportunities for engagement for all. And we're really sort of pressing against some of those assumptions and testing the merging of donor levels, and really moving away from some of the things that were binding us in the past, including restrictions on how many people you can feed or how many people you can get into a space. So with the virtual sphere, we have so much more opportunity, and it's really been exciting to see the level of engagement from a much broader audience than we were able to do before. So those are my challenges and wins, or wins and challenges. I'm going to kick it back to you, Caitlin.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jamie. Thanks to all of you for sharing this. We're going to get back into the details of many of the campaigns and tactics you all are using soon. But first, I'm going to do something that feels counterintuitive. I'm going to, for a moment, ask you a question, and we're going to take people and relationships out of it, and we're just going to talk about donations by the numbers. So, Anne, if you could launch our poll here. I'm curious, for all of you in the room today, how are you faring with donations? And by that, I mean revenue in 2020. So this fiscal year, are you ahead of pace, on pace, or behind pace from last year? I can't see the poll. It might be because I'm sharing my screen, but I'm hoping.
No, I'm sorry. I just want to jump in. I'm having a technical issue with the poll. So sorry about that.
We're working. It's on there now. Oh wait, I see it. We're gonna skip. So do I need to skip it, and should I just move on?
Let's try. We might need to move on. I'm not really positive.
Oh, it looks like people are answering now. We've just got both up at once.
Yes, I see both of the questions.
Great. Well, we'll let it go for a minute here. If you all just want to answer, you can answer them both. We're going to come back to that second question later in the session. So if you'd all answer the first question, that would be terrific. It feels really wrong to say, let's take people out of the equation and only look at revenue. And yet, I imagine that many of you have boards and executive directors and colleagues and foundations and everyone who's asking you to report here by the numbers. So that's where we're starting just for a second. Give you one more minute here to insert your answers. And what I'm seeing, very broadly, numbers are still shifting here a bit, is that about 40% of you are ahead, about 40% of you are behind, and about 20% are right where you were last year. So this is consistent with what we see based on individual organizations. The performance of individual orgs varies wildly based on all kinds of things: staffing, programs, prior donor relationships, the aggressiveness of your campaigns and contacts, the effectiveness of those campaigns, and of course the stories in and of themselves that you're telling now. Do you have a compelling message to show how you are serving your community at this time? So there's a lot of factors that come into play here, and we can see that everyone in this room is in a slightly different place, and thank you all for sharing that here. I'm going to share with you now some high-level data. This is coming from aggregate data only, so we're going to jump up to 20,000 feet and look at data from TRG's International Benchmark Dashboard. I'm going to spout off a list of names here, and then we're going to get to the content, but it's really critical to know where all this data is coming from. We have over 400 organizations in North America and the UK that are participating. Today I'm only showing you data from 100 US organizations. And this is in partnership with Purple 7. They're a data company in the UK. They do extraordinary work. And also with SMU Data Arts, Southern Methodist University, and supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. We created this benchmark as soon as COVID hit, not to track the decline of sales in COVID, but to be able to track growth and trends that we see in recovery. So know that there will be more data points coming from this, but right now we have some, as of June 30th, data around donations. So let's start here with the big picture. It's not terrible, it's not great, but we're seeing a 2% decline in donation revenue from 2019 to 2020 over the same period of time. Now there's a really important grain of salt that I'm going to give you as you digest this, because you might look at this and say, yeah, okay, we're on par, this feels pretty good. But in fact, we saw the largest gifts get significantly larger. And that is what is making this look relatively stable. So if we were to look at the top 10 gifts in this data set this year compared to last year, it's tens of millions of dollars more than what we saw in the previous year. So actually, if you think about this decline for what is likely more true for your organization, unless you got one of those $15 million gifts, in which case, congratulations, we're really looking at an overall decline of somewhere between 10 and 15% in the US. So it's significant. I'm focusing on something that sounds negative, but only for a moment, because at the beginning of this crisis, we heard from many organizations that we work with and chatter across the sector that there was an expectation or an assumption that development and contributed revenue would be able to replace lost revenue from ticket sales. And what we're seeing here in this data is that's not the case. We didn't see a massive surge that's able to replace lost revenue. And yet we maintained a lot of it. So there's huge wins in that. And of course, organizationally, we see different things. Okay, a few more ways to look at this. I just said this to you, but I'm showing it to you now in a different way. These two different pies represent 2019 and 2020, where we're separating out those angel gifts, really large gifts of $100,000 or more, as a piece of the pie. In 2019, we saw that gigantic gifts of $100,000 or more was about 36% of the pie. Now we've got a slightly smaller pie this year, just ever so slightly, but those large gifts, really large gifts, are making up 46% of the pie. So that's this big shift that we saw in the aggregate data set. And this is also interesting. I want to take you to two different segment groups that you are all talking to a lot. Nomenclature here aside, these are your most loyal patrons. These active and super active patrons are defined by the recency of their transaction and frequency of transaction with your organization. So these are all the closest to you patrons. And what we see in both the active and super active buckets of smaller gifts, I'm not suggesting that $99,000 isn't small, but we're taking those $15 million gifts out of here. We're seeing that they've given less. So those that were most loyal most likely to give have actually seen a decrease in their giving year over year. Here's what that looks like. It's an 11% decline, or $7.1 million less than what these two groups together gave last year. Still, they represent 60% of the overall gift revenue. Just these two groups are most loyal segments. Okay, a few more, wrapping this up, and then we're going to start talking about what this is looking like on the ground. So revenue decreased by 2%, much higher reliance on major gifts than what we saw in 2019. Yet, this is new, the number of gifts increased by 21%. More individual gifts came in this year than last year, significantly at 21%. So what does this mean? Is that more people are giving less. Now I'm going to bring people back in. At the top of this, I said forget about people. We got to start thinking about people, because it's people that make all of this happen as we think about donors. I mean, these are individuals who are giving to individuals here. So the first question that I have for all of you, provocation, reminder, put that in whatever bucket is relevant to your thinking and the way your organization approaches this, is to ask if you are tracking metrics beyond revenue in donation. And if you're not, here are things you've got to start considering. Because we're people talking to people, we need to look at things at the household level. Even individual gifts don't show us everything. We really want to know how many households are contributing to us. So be tracking upgrades, downgrades, and lapses. And all three of those are really critical, because they're three very different campaigns and strategies that you might want to employ to be able to address this. Right. So we got to think about these things as people. So think about it as people, and then we want to break those people down into other categories based on behavior, so that we know what appeal we can put in front of them and we can tailor our messaging. Okay, I'm going to stop this share for a minute because I want to hear from all of you, from my colleagues here. Let's start, Letitia, with you. I've just described what we're seeing from 20,000 feet in aggregate, a decline, an increase in actual gifts. What are you seeing, and what would you attribute either declines or successes to at True Colors?
Well, first, the main thing I want to address is that during this pandemic, it's important to first reach out to your patrons and just check in and see how they're doing. As I said earlier, I could not fathom reaching out to anyone without knowing where they are, from racial injustice to protesting to family members sick and ill, struggling to catch their next breath, and including job loss as well. So just making sure that I have a human moment and I check in with our patients to see where they are. But what I've seen is that, especially with the kickoff with Giving Tuesday now, is that we have individuals who are coming back in, wanting to support, wanting to connect with True Colors. And more frequently, I might add as well too, we have someone who continues, who's an actor as well too, that's in our patron base. They continue to give $25 just sporadically, right? And so even the smallest amount of money, making sure that you continue to, like Jamie was saying, making sure that you connect with these people, making sure that you let them know that you recognize them and you see them, not just as a dollar sign, but that you see them as people who are, and we're all going through these things together, whatever they are in the world, and whatever is their care to touch. It could be, for some people, they may give more to health and human services that they give to the arts and culture. Okay, that's great, because we all need the support. And so being able to connect with people wherever they are in their giving spectrum, wherever they are, and being able to connect with everyone in their own humanity is important.
Tisha, can I ask you a question? You said at the top, which I think is so valuable and really hard to do, is you said you wanted to meet people where they were, understanding if there had been job loss or how they'd been affected by COVID, all these things that you've listed. How did you do that?
Yeah, so in the beginning of all of this, what we end up doing at True Colors, we combined our subscriber and our donor email because we have a lot of crossover there. And so we send out a message to them directly. And we also send a message from our artists directly to our patrons as well too, but specifically to our donors and subscribers. We let them know where we are with our programming and then invited them to contact us. And then after that, about a week or so, I followed up with some donors as well, some of the donors that have my cell phone number, and then some donors who I also know who check in with me regularly, and we have hour-long conversations, right? And so knowing to just check in with some donors, doesn't matter what level of giving that they are, checking in on them and having those real interactions and those questions. And also in Atlanta, we have a great tracking system as far as where the hot spots are for COVID-19, right? And so I would even, I'm that person, I'm going to check. And so I would even look and see like where hot spots are for COVID-19. And before I call a patron, I would also making sure that I touch base with them and ask them about their family first, right? Ask them about where they are. And not really talking about what we're doing at True Colors, but just connecting with people who they are. So I did that via email as well as phone as well too. And also a great touch point is videos as well too. So doing a video message is something that we've done as well to connect with people.
I really appreciate that. And honestly, you're the first person that I've talked to that has directly layered COVID data on top of communications to be able to say, like, I'm checking where you live and know, so I know if this is the right question or the right time. That's just really, that's really inspiring and really well done. And thank you for sharing that. Jamie in Seattle, I'm wondering if you might tell us how your fiscal year ended and what your campaigns look like for really since COVID. So what did post-COVID fundraising look like at Seattle Rep?
Yeah, so we, along with many others, closed mid-March, heading into what is the fourth quarter of our fiscal year. Our fiscal year ends June 30th. And the fourth quarter of our fiscal year is a really heavy fundraising time for us. We typically have our gala during that period of time. We're typically renewing a bunch of our subscribers during that time for the next season, and we see a lot of roundup gifts with subscription renewal. And we have our fiscal year-end giving campaign. All of that going into the fourth quarter without any in-person opportunities and managing through all of the fundraising needed amongst the world events was certainly a mountain. I will say we had come into it with a lot of momentum. So we were already pacing ahead of the year prior, which we ultimately maintained through the end of June. We were about 10% ahead of the prior year before COVID relief, what I call COVID relief funding, which was one-time extraordinary gifts, either from foundation funders, government, a little bit of government, and individuals. So we ended our fiscal year better than we've ever ended a fiscal year in the past. We met and exceeded all of our goals, which was amazing. And it really supported our organization's not only general needs, but certainly our cash flow, quite frankly. Heading into the new fiscal year, we are now in the process where we're sort of rejiggering our plans for the year. We just only a few weeks ago announced the postponement of our season without any new performance dates attached to it. So we're really working through our case for support and our planning for this current fiscal year, this coming fiscal year, in a new way. We are behind where we were last year at this time. As a result of, I think, the changing environment that we're in, as well as some of the real significant generosity we saw in April, May, June, that may have been, we're still in discovery phase, early giving for some folks who were trying to help us through cash flow, but maybe aren't anticipating giving again this year. We're still figuring that out. I will say in response to some of what the data you shared, I'll just admit we did not have any seven-figure gifts at the end of the fiscal year. But we did see some significant support from major donors in general. We also are seeing sort of, especially in that mid-level major category, as well as lower level giving, repeated gifts every few months. So sort of tracking with what you said, the giving multiple times at various levels, we're definitely seeing that come to fruition as well. One of the things that we're trying to do, in addition to the one-on-one Zoom calls and phone calls where we have capacity at the staff level, we're realizing how limited our capacity truly is to support our entirety of our community. We're on a lean staff situation, probably again, like many others. So even in the best of times, we couldn't connect to each person personally. And certainly right now we are even more limited. We've, the thing that we've started to activate is our board. We have a sort of small cadre of trustees who have agreed to do thank you calls for us, and every single donor gets a call regardless of the level of their gift within a week of the gift. And that's from our board, just to make sure that people understand that we see them and we appreciate them. We're working on whether we can activate that same group to do check-in calls with patrons who are not giving, but we're still, again, in the beginning phases of activating that effort.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Jamie, Jamie and Jamie, I like sending the baton between the two of you. Jamie, talk to us about Alliance. You wrapped up your fiscal year. How are you approaching donor relations now and coming into whatever your year is going to be? What's the plan at Alliance?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of it as continuing to exercise some muscles that we had built over the past 5 years in terms of donor relations, and then developing some new muscle memories that we were trying to. So I'll talk about both of those categories. The new muscle memories, I think, like a lot of people, we had been trying to look at, and Letitia mentioned this a little bit, of how do we re-merge or merge for the first time donor relations and subscriber ticket buyer relations, to think of it more as household relations. And that's something that the marketing director at the Alliance and I went to what we called marriage counseling at TRG about 3.5 years ago. It was a retreat for development directors and marketing directors to talk about all of our marital issues of fighting over revenue at our theaters. And so we had started what ended up being about a 3-year plan to get to March of 2020, when we would launch for the first time kind of a combined rolled up, really focusing on household revenue rather than a subscriber email campaign and a donation email campaign. And so perfect timing on that. But we are making lemonade out of those lemons, because the really interesting thing that's coming out of this, and you alluded to it a little bit, Caitlin, is that a lot of our theaters are getting significant ticket donation revenue right now. And we are no different than that. We ran a matching gift campaign at the end of our fiscal year, which was April and May of this year, because we had about $175,000 worth of ticket revenue sitting on account in Tessitura. And interestingly, the subscriber non-donors have always been really difficult for us to convert into donors, right? So they've been subscribing, some of them for 30 or 40 years to the Alliance, some for the full 52 years. And they're like, you know what, this is what we're doing. We commit $500 or $600 a year for our subscriptions, and that's what we do. And so we've gotten a whole lot of them to flex the donation muscle, multi-$100,000, not 100,000, multi-$100 donations, excuse me. I wish there were multi-$100,000. But some of them are doing that for the first time ever, and some of them for the first time in a long time. And so my staff and I are looking at how can we make them feel like $1 million for donating $250. Some of them were $500. You know, we had a blind renewal campaign already out in the mix when COVID hit. And so some people had re-upped for their entire subscription for this current year we're in. And they're not going to be able to use it. And so we're trying to develop some of those muscle memories with people who are committed to us but weren't yet donors. And so we're trying to develop that new muscle memory for them and us of the development team talking to subscribers more conscientiously and more, kind of like Letitia said, more thoughtfully, in the same way that we would a major donor. And then the muscle memory that we already had that we're truly flexing in a different way, we do what are called philanthropic planning meetings, or PPMs, so philanthropic planning meeting, with every single member of our board and all of our major donors. So we have 65 people on our board, and then we have about 200 major donors as well. And so my staff and I meet with each one of them one-on-one every year to talk about their philanthropy to the theater. And we have a form that shows them their previous 3 years giving, if it's a board member, how many board meetings they attended, what committees they're on. It's a true checkup with us every time. And then we talk about what they want to do for the theater this year. And we talk about all the special initiatives we have going on. In this case, our artistic director and our associate artistic director are celebrating their 20th anniversary seasons in 2020. And I had this awesome, like really awesome vision campaign planned for that had to kind of hit the scrap heap because the vision of the entire world changed in 2020. But we're still moving forward with honoring them and setting aside some artistic vision funds for them. And so these PPMs, or philanthropic planning meetings, now all of them are over Zoom. I had one today from 2 to 3 right before I hopped on this call. And I spend an hour or sometimes 2 hours with our board members and major donors, just exactly what Letitia said, hearing from them. 90% of it is spent talking about not theater related things, talking about what they're doing, how their family is, where their family happens to be right now. And then we always get around to what they want to do for the theater. And I'm ready and armed with what we're doing so that we have that. And so stretching that muscle and continuing it even during COVID is a huge way that we're remaining relevant. And we're seeing some great returns there. Board members are doubling down. We've had a few big 5-figure gifts that we usually have to chase in April and May have come in June. So the first month of the fiscal year, which has been huge. And that is a big shot in the arm. And so of course we lavish praise on them. I've been having our board chair and future board chair that we're just about to vote on follow up with board members as they give in a different way than we have in the past. And so we're trying to be more thoughtful about how we're talking to donors and making sure that we're checking on them as well, just like Letitia said, because that's really important.
That's great. Thank you. There's going to be more questions, I'm certain, for all of you about how you're doing this. But I'm going to take us back to the second question of the poll. I'm sorry, we had a technical something here, so you've all already answered. But Anne, if you would share those results with us. The question here was, besides major gifts, so taking aside however you would define that, what was creating revenue success or driving the revenue for your organization? And what we've got here, 40% of you said it was a special campaign. So this was COVID related, in the moment related matching gifts and campaigns. Your traditional annual fund campaign came in second. So that was huge here, right? We've got 40% in one, 30% in the other. So 70% of you have attributed campaigns to the success that you've had. We have a couple of extraordinary galas or events, it looks like. Ticket donations is a bigger bucket for many of you than I imagine it ever has been before. It's 8% of you said ticket donations were big, and monthly giving is playing a role. There's also 14% of you that did something else entirely, which I'm super curious about because we all talked through buckets and we couldn't come up with a lot of other buckets. So I would invite you to share those in chat, what your other somethings have been, whether that's been top-up gifts alongside digital programming, whatever you've got. Really curious to know what buckets you have that aren't here. So thank you all for sharing that. Jamie, you queued something up here that now I'm going to take us into just a little bit. Jamie mentioned marriage counseling that he and his marketing colleague did with us at TRG. We're not going to do marriage counseling today. We can't because all of your colleagues aren't here and there are many of you in this room. But I do want to share some ideas about that and just some ideas about campaigns. So first, a couple of ideas about what to do right now if you're not already doing it. And this is not exhaustive. This is not exhaustive. Hear me when I say it. There is so much more to do and so much nuance in this, and we'll get into that in the conversation. But if you aren't already, ask. Talk to your donors and don't be afraid of asking right now. Ask more frequently or as frequently than you did before, and go into the other channels that you used to use as much as you can. Jamie's right. Seattle Jamie is right. You don't have the theater maybe as a place to convene anymore. You don't have those touch points with patrons in person, but we still have more than email. We've got more than email in ways to be able to communicate with people. Lean into direct mail. Every single organization I know that has leaned into direct mail in these campaigns has seen a positive return and a boost when they started it. Nobody got all the way in their campaign with digital alone. So don't forget about direct mail in what you're doing here. Phone calls, you all talked about that. How are you communicating with your donors on a regular basis? And maybe they're not all one-to-one calls. If you don't have the staff capacity to be able to call every $25 ticket donor, then let's not call each of them individually, but is there an opportunity here to use a robocall that actually feels fun? Not a gross one, not a voting one, nothing that makes people uncomfortable, but one that is true and right to the tone and place of your organization. I was a marketing and development director for many years. We used them extraordinarily successfully. People liked hearing from us in that way. Is that a right channel for you? Is sending someone a personalized video the right channel? Sure, you're still sending it to them over email, but it feels a little bit different. And are there in-person connections that you can make? Deliveries to someone's home, setting up coffee dates if and when that is safe in the place that you are. Let's not forget that people can still commune, sometimes in safe ways, and that may be right for where you are. Of course, in all of it, track your results. What's working? What's not? Listen to the feedback. Letitia said it. She's asking people what they need, where they are. Jamie's meeting with his major donors all the time saying, where are we going? What do you want from this? Where can we help you take your donation? So let's listen to the feedback, adjust those campaigns, and continue. But this can't be one-stop shopping anymore. We're going to have to be really nimble and continue to go back to this wheel and change things in it every time. Enthusiastically, so critical. I put enthusiastically in here for a reason. Don't just lean into upgrades. Enthusiastically lean into upgrades and renewals in ways that maybe you never have before. Ask people to give more, even if they've just given, if you believe they've got capacity, and if you've done right by them in their first donation. Did you do what you said you were going to do? Did it go to the fund that is now doing XYZ? Great, come back to them and say, we did right by you. Here's the return on that investment. Can you do more? Right? We want to close the loop that we opened with them with the initial ask, and then you can come back in and ask for more. When and where are you asking? We talked about channels, yes, channels, but also you've got marketing colleagues, education colleagues who are doing things online perhaps, who are doing things in other places. Are you talking to them about where you can benefit each other in those campaigns? Do you have a quick donations ask when people are signing up for a $10 remote something? Make sure you do, because we are seeing increased donations there. Jamie, are you doing some of that now?
Yeah, I wanted to lift up, that's a really great point. Tessitura, which I know many of us use, came out with some much easier donation pages that you can set up for really fast donations where people don't have to create whole accounts. And we have used those kind of like virtual tip jars on some of the live programming we've done on Facebook Live and YouTube, and raised, $6,000 to $7,000 in kind of just over the transom donations there. That's super quick and easy, and people don't have to set up a whole account. So just wanted to lift that up, that the marketing team said, hey, can we put a tip jar? And we were like, yes.
Yes, please add tip jars. That's great. And I love the notion of the tip jar. It feels like we're there in person. It feels like we're giving people to people in small ways that become really meaningful. It's great. The last thing I have here, and I think all of you talked about this in some way, is affirm or challenge your definition of a donor. What does it take to be a donor at your organization right now? My own experience is that I never really counted a ticket donor as a donor. That was just somebody who couldn't see a show, and it never really moved into a donation sphere. There were no benefits attached. There was nothing there. But you've got hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many of dollars coming in this year from ticket donations. How are you thinking about them as donors? What benefits are there? How does that change the communication cycle with these patrons? My children are listening to something hilarious behind me, and I'm really sorry for all of you that they're having so much fun. So apologies for the background noise. But how, and these small donations, right? People who are giving to a tip jar. If you have online programming right now that you're charging just nominal fees for, $5, $10, and someone is giving you 10 or 20, doubling the value of that ticket purchase, that can be significant and a new entry point for donation. Right now, when our goals as organizations is to keep the patrons that we used to serve close to us and invite new and more patrons to join us in whatever platforms we have where they can, we want to open more doors. So wherever you can remove hurdles from thinking of someone as a donor and talking to someone like a donor, remove it. This is not a year for hurdles. 2020 gave us plenty. As institutions, we don't want hurdles on things, on ticket exchanges, on where buckets live, on any of that. Get rid of it and treat people with the generosity that they've just shown in these transactions. Okay, and this is where Jamie started us down a path, and I'm going to take us here for just a moment, and then we're going to stop share, and we're going to hear from all of you. Right now, in this time, it is more important than ever for patrons to be at the center of our activities. Patrons, people, not patrons, plural, like the whole audience. Yes, we're all always thinking of the audience, but I'm talking about the person, me. So right now, this is all just going to be about me because it's going to make the analogies easier. Siloed communications at an organization feel like this to me, Caitlin. It rains down on me from all different places. Oh, social media is asking me to do this, and education is sending me something about this, and then there's marketing and fundraising, and you've got these extra shows and concerts, and then there's this sales stuff, and it's all coming down on top of me. None of it is being directed to me. I'm just standing out in rainy Atlanta right now with Jamie and Letitia, and whatever's hitting me is what I'm opening at the right time. But in fact, not all of these things are right for me. These aren't the right places for me to engage, for me to become closer to your organization for you, right? So some of this is what's in it for you, and some of it's what's in it for me. Do you really want to send me, well, now you know I have kids, so maybe it's really right that you send me an education offer. We know that Caitlin is stuck at home with her 2 kids. You guys, stop asking her to go and watch a concert for adults. She can't get away from her children for more than 10 minutes. Let's give her something for her kids to do for 20 minutes while she makes dinner. Let's meet people where they are. Like Letitia said, let's figure out where your people are and what they need, and then give them the right offer. But holistically as an organization, this is a thing that is really hard to make happen. Hear me say it. This is a super easy graphic to go back and say, hey guys, we do this. The next graphic is virtually impossible to just make happen overnight. But here's what we want it to be. We want the patron to be at the center, where your entire organization is working around them to create the right environment for them to feel welcome, for them to feel informed, engaged, and all of the other adjectives that you use in your mission statements about what you do and give to people that you serve. But this requires a tremendous amount of collaboration, sometimes a restructure, or a rethinking of how you're going to define things, right? It's super easy right now. While you are maybe down people and not knowing when you're coming back, let me just throw this at the wall and say, oh, and. But the reason why I'm throwing it at the wall now to say, oh, and, is that you have an opportunity now in all of this, when there are awkward, awful, terrible pauses to our industry, to say, how do we make the most of this so that right now and on the other side, we are patron-centric, that we think about the person, the individual, the whole person first, and how we serve them, right? Because if we can serve a person, We can serve a community. We can serve the places where we are in more meaningful ways. So other ways of looking at this, if you know TRG.
Amen and hallelujah, Caitlin.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Letitia. I'll take it. Okay, let's look at this. So if you know TRG, you've seen this. We have this perfect stair step. And maybe this is part of the problem, that we all think of this as a stair step. We've got one relationship to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's linear. Now it's linear in part because this is what the data shows us people do. Almost every time we look at an organization when things are normal, this is how people move through an organization in terms of their relationship and their transactions. But right now, we don't have all of this anymore. We have some of it depending on what you're selling and what you're doing, but we also have digital in a new form entirely. We've got donor relationships that are existing in totally new spaces here that are kind of outside or peripherally attached here. But anyway, here's what we've got. Traditionally, this is how we've thought of the patron journey. It's still a good one. There's math behind this. And then in our org structures, it looks like this. All this green stuff at the bottom, this is marketing. These are transactional relationships. This is subscription and ticket buying. And then we move into development, and there's a very clear difference between who does what. Jamie said this. This is the way that we think we should look at patrons. We should look at patrons holistically and think about them in terms of their behavior. We use an algorithm at TRG to do this work that combines monetary investment, recency of transactions and engagement, frequency of engagement, and growth. Are people doing more year over year or less year over year? So this is how we aggregate it. There are other ways that you certainly could. But essentially what you want to do is think about me, Caitlin, the person, holistically. What does Caitlin do with us? Well, she subscribes, she sends her kids to camp, she buys single tickets, and she likes everything on Facebook. This is who Caitlin is in our world. And Caitlin then looks about like a buyer. So what do we need to ask Caitlin to do to give her a better experience of our theater company, and so that we can increase her value and commitment? Matt's here, so he wanted to announce that. Thank you very much. You can't call anybody right now. You gotta go. I'll be back. So bad. So this is really awesome for me right now. So we want to think about me as the person, what's going to be the right ask for me. And when that happens, when we start looking at patrons collectively and we can put them in buckets of behavior that include all of these things, not just I was a ticket buyer, now I need to become a subscriber. I was a subscriber, now I need to become a donor. Then we start looking at a department that says, well, God, marketing and development have to work across all of our patron levels. Because in development, you all know as well as I do, you've got triers. You've got flaky people at the bottom of this this pyramid that give you $20 every couple of years, but they don't come to shows. They're not seeing anything, and yet they're talked to like they're at the top because they were a donor. When in fact there are ticket buyers who spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a year at your organization and don't receive any benefit for that investment beyond the show. Now the show might be enough. Right? The show is enough for them. They keep doing it. But what happens when you go to that patron and say, Jamie, you are spending $1,200 a year with us. We want to create a better experience for you here. There are benefits that we can give you that will bring you closer to this thing that you so love. So it's about collaboration, breaking down silos, putting people at the center, rethinking how we define our donors or our prospects, or even just this pipeline that we've got. So how? Yeah, that's true. That's hard. Like there's a lot of math. So do a bunch of math. That's a way to get into this. But now might not be the time for a big investment in that, or you might not have the staff or capacity for huge math in this moment. So do these things. Start. Just start. Just say, no, we can't. That's not how we work. Say, yes, we can take a step. Let's start taking a step in the direction of thinking about our patrons differently as people, not as units. Have a virtual cup of coffee, glass of wine, whatever time of day it is, and whatever beverage you like with your marketing counterpart, with your education counterparts, to say, let's talk about our people. What are you doing right now? How are you communicating with them? What are your goals? What are ours? If you're not already regularly having these meetings with other revenue generating teams in your organization, start now, right? We're all on Zoom. Start it once a week. Talk about what you're doing so that you can see where doors are naturally going to open. And then do it again. Then do it again and again and again and again until it's routine and a pattern and something you can't let go of. Identify, this is TRG, identify some key joint metrics and set goals. So set a goal that requires both of you to work together. This could be about subscriber donors. Let's look at a specific group of subscribers, those that have been there for 10 or more years and haven't donated. What's the right approach to this very specific segment? And what is our goal that we hope to achieve in that campaign? Maybe you're looking at retained revenue percentages from canceled performances. I've heard this from so many organizations. We got all of this ticket revenue back and it lives in marketing. So we don't really think about it in development, but it's a donation. Let's think about it in development. We don't care what bucket it's in. What's important is that it's in the organizational bucket. So now what's your plan for re-engaging those donors that have given you tickets, that have made smaller donations now? The next best step might not be donation. So development directors, hear me. The next best step for every patron isn't donation. It might be marketing. It might be a class. But working together with your colleagues, you can say, this is the next best step. And you can try it and you might fail miserably and then you'll try a different next step. But try these things out together so that you're meeting people where they are. All right, so then create this campaign. Now we know what our shared goal is. We know who we're targeting. What are we doing? How are we talking to them? When are there deadlines? Who's lead, right? Is Letitia going to lead this? Is this going to be a development-led effort, or is this an education-led effort? Know who's on first, but then you're all tracking and managing this thing together. And then, of course, timing's really critical in this because you're all still doing other things and you've got other campaigns. Is your segmentation preserving that patron at the center mentality? Are we making sure that we're only asking Caitlin to do this thing that we really think she needs, which is a program for her kids, right? Keep me focused so that I'm not trying to choose between 32 different offers and asks from you. Finally, measure your success. Measure it. Know what worked, know what didn't. It won't all work, but some of it will, and then you know what to capitalize on and tweak moving forward. Okay, so that was like the big challenge. I'm gonna throw it out there and let's see how far we can get here in a pandemic in terms of rethinking our patron relationships. I'm gonna take a breath and invite you all to share your questions now for any and all of us. I would invite all of my panelists here to take themselves off mute, and as you see questions coming in, please shout them out wherever you wanna go.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to lift up, my other Jamie, West Coast Jamie, said this, that they have a donor newsletter going out for the first time, and something that we are in talks with right now at the Alliance happens to be with the people who usually print our program. And of course, like many of you, we have a third party that sells ads in a little booklet, and then they print our programs for us. And they approached us recently and said, hey, I know you're not doing live productions, but if we print a magazine for you quarterly, you can pay to post it. So basically, we'll cover the printing costs because we'll continue to sell the ads that we normally would. You can fill it with all of your content and use it like a quarterly magazine as long as you don't have productions anymore. And so we're just having to come up with the postage on each one of those, but we'll be able to fill it completely with donor communications and program information. So just wanted to lift that up as a possibility if you have one of those partners in your area that you're working with as well.
Oh, I'm on mute. I've never been on Zoom before. That's great. Thank you, Jamie. I think I'm really good at Zoom, but I don't actually see raised hands. If any of you have questions, please raise your hands and we'll unmute you so you can ask them directly here. Or you can add them in chat if you prefer that.
Hi, Caitlin. It looks like we have a hand from Sarah Clark. Sarah, do
Great.
you want to take the mic and ask your question?
Yeah, hi everybody. Sorry, my internet's a little wonky, so if I'm breaking up, let me know. I was wondering, most of the conversation today has been around individuals and some foundation and government giving, not a lot of talk around corporate. I know that traditionally corporate sponsorship is tied to sponsorships of shows and all of the commensurate benefits and events. So just for the group, has anybody kind of cracked the nut on this in this new world when we can't produce? Have you been talking to your corporate sponsors? Are you finding other avenues for how to do those renewals and even attract new folks in this environment?
I see Cassie raising her hand there or Robin, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I'm Robin Casey. I'm from Northern Stage in Vermont. It's really great to see everybody and so nice to be with other like-minded development people. So thank you for doing this. We just actually started focusing on businesses. Like you said, I mean, our businesses are usually our sponsors. And this coming fall, we're really focused on mostly online virtual experiences. But also we're hoping to go live with at least one production with a one-person show. So we really looked at our perks from the last years. We decreased the amount per sponsor, and we're doing virtual. So we're offering 20-second commercials, before our virtual production. We're doing virtual playbills, that type of thing. So it's really just shifting from in-person to online and still trying to offer the same perks, if you will. But again, our businesses, especially being in rural Vermont, have been hit hard. And so we're trying to be respectful of that as well and continue the engagement. So I'm just starting this work right now.
Yeah, and I'll add too, we had some great success toward the beginning of the pandemic. Our costume shop, like many of yours, switched to making masks and gowns for 3 of the hospitals here in Atlanta. And we were able to get some great corporate support there that helped us keep those folks on our payroll during that part of the pandemic. And now we've actually, because we're announcing a lot of virtual programs, we're starting to package them together in a couple different ways to send out to all of our corporate partners. And one of them is all of the different diversity related programs that we have going on at the Alliance, from the staff positions that we have created and are creating to some of the productions that we're doing virtually and some of the programs that we've been running for several years now, and packaging them differently so that corporations can see where they can step alongside us and have some brand alignment with some great work that we're doing here in the community. And that's been pretty successful. But we're still also getting traditional sponsorships for some of the virtual programs we're doing. Because a lot of it is also evergreen, right? So some of the non-equity things that we're all creating, that's going to live on our site for a long time. And for us, one of our education shows that would have been a live production over the summer is now going to be an animated feature. And it will kind of be a more evergreen content that we'll be able to share out for longer. And so getting corporate support around some of those things, they actually get more bang for their buck.
And I just wanted to chime in. I love all of that, what you just said, Jamie, and the other development officers that chimed in. I think how I look at my corporate relationships, I look at as them as individual donors almost as well too. And so knowing where their corporate entity is going and their alignment and their refocus and their reshifting before I make those initial calls is important for me. But also it's just reinventing my engagement with them as we are innovating how we do our work at True Colors. Really thinking about what are new offerings that we can present unto them. And so, of course, we have virtual, but also thinking about, also thinking about how we engage with them and with our programming. And so we have community conversations at True Colors, and we're doing more of those now, of course. And so looking at the topics that our community conversations are going to be focusing on, from racial injustice to education in our schools, and finding the sponsors who have that alignment as well too. And so just rethinking the sponsors' commitment to our mission as an institution as a whole versus their commitment to what they're going to receive from a production. And so I'm just shifting my mindset around that type of engagement with our corporate partners so that I find a mutually beneficial relationship based upon our values that speak to one another.
My gosh, I love everything you just said, Letitia, right? I mean, how are we, because all of this, in theory, all of the work that we do as organizations is serving our community. We're bettering something there. We're giving something back, right? We're not selling widgets. We're selling experiences and community and ways for people to connect. And so when you can bring that into the relationships that you have locally with your corporate sponsors, that builds such a strong community tie when you take it away from the product and into the values. It's just, that's super inspiring.
Not to belabor the topic, but I will just, in addition to many of the things that you've already heard, one of the things we're exploring is creating events, because a lot of our sponsors have typically brought groups or distributed tickets to shows to either their staff or clients. And so we're really looking at ways that we can continue to offer something like that in the virtual sphere. So it may be a post-show conversation, you know, we're looking to piggyback on things that we're already doing, so we're not making work, but really looking at whether there's a post-show conversation for staff of X company to have a conversation with an artist after a particular event, so that we're mirroring that element in it as well. But it's all values based in our scenario. We're not seeing corporate sponsors who are just transactional, and we actually haven't for a long time. So for whatever that's worth.
We've shared a lot of good ideas today and things that are working. And my three co-panelists here have all had a lot of success in financially and retaining people and in their programs. But I'm curious if anyone would be willing to share something that totally didn't work. What did you try that just fell flat? What did you learn from it? Why didn't it work? Is there anyone who's had a moment this year that was like, oh God, I really shouldn't have. Why did we? Or this didn't land right. Is there something we can learn from any of our failures? Is there anyone who has one that would share? I mean, I'm sure you're all stellar all the time.
I'll say that I received an email from a board member who's generally in that sort of middle range of connectivity, not our highest and most deeply engaged, but not the most distant either, talking about her giving for the coming year as she was wrestling. We're actually in the beginning of launching a campaign as well, an above and beyond campaign. And so she was wrestling with maintaining her annual giving and adding to it, which ultimately at the end of the day is increasing her annual support. And in this message, it said, I'm just struggling with why I would increase my giving when the theater's not producing anything. And I have to say it was a complete gut punch, because I knew that this question was out there, but I did not think that it was sitting amongst our board. And I always compliment our board. I actually think our board is really fantastic as a whole and individually in terms of their understanding of things. And I feel like we've brought them along and really grown and deepened their connection with the theater. But the fact that that was coming from a board member, to me, really had me expedite some frequently asked questions about why give to a theater that's not producing. And I think I was late in generating that copy and distributing it specifically to our board, who may be talking about this out in the community. So that was a not awesome moment that I can share.
I'm so grateful you shared that, Jamie. I mean, there is sometimes, and none of you have said this, so this is not coming from anything you've said, but I've been a development director. I've also been a board member, where it can be, there's just the expectation, like the board gets it. The board's in it. They've got their give or get. It's fairly predictable. We have all these engagement tools. They come to meetings. So we can forget that our board members can be our biggest and best advocates, but they can also be not that when they're not fully into the organization. So it's a really good point that you bring up right now about how we tell our story through our advocates, whether those are board members or longtime subscribers or your volunteer ushers. How are we creating the right messages and stories for those close to us all the time to be out there? And it's, I mean, you just put a really fine point on it. It's a really great point, Jamie. So thanks for sharing. I see some others have said, yep, yes, we've been there too. So you're not alone in that one. Thank you.
Yeah, and Jamie, someone also asked, Lee asked from Paper Mill Playhouse if you could share those frequently asked questions. Just wanted to say that just in case you didn't see it.
It did. We don't have them posted on our website yet, but I will figure out the best way to get them out. Glad to share it.
Yeah, and I think this is a little bit less of a failure and more of a reckoning that we've had to come to at the Alliance. We are PWI, predominantly white institution. And in Atlanta, there's been a very large conversation going on about funding for the arts, specifically for, BIPOC majority organizations, and how they had been shut out of a lot of funding for a long time here in Atlanta from our big community foundation and other funders as well. And so we've had to have a lot of reckoning moments within our funding conversations with foundations, or really just internally, of should we be going after all of these different asks and all of these different things when we know that there are a lot of other people in line for a limited pot of money in Atlanta right now. And so that's been a really interesting dynamic for us to be able to stay true to our mission. And of course, as fundraisers, we, like you said earlier, Caitlin, you just have to ask, right? Like you have to ask plenty and often and everything else. But at the same time, I think this moment in America, and for us in our local community as well, we have to say, should we ask all the time to every organization, or should we take a step back because we've enjoyed funding for 52 years at the Alliance? And so that's been an interesting dynamic to mix into this, and something that we haven't really talked a whole lot about on this call yet, but it's something that's certainly swirling around in our ecosystem.
That's so true, Jamie. There was that's a big issue with organizations of color, and statistically, it's important for PWIs to really have that internal dialogue. And so I commend you, Jamie, and I thank you for your leadership for even saying that out loud for others to hear as well too. At True Colors, what I see as far as what struggles or difficulties really just comes down to plain and simple staff capacity. And I'm sure others are facing that as well too. I haven't been able to hire an annual fund manager. So I am a development director of one, development department of one, excuse me. So where I'm seeing some of the certain balls drop as far as communication and where I envision that I have for the development department. What should I do now? How can I reinvent and be really creative in addressing and being able to do the best practices that I know that should be done? And so that's what keeps me awake at night, right? Is how can I do what I know I need to do in a different way that does not stress me out, right? But also keeps me effective at doing my job and driving forward where the company needs to go is where I'm at. And I'm finding different ways, of course, by doing that as well, by engaging with other staff members and board members and volunteers that are really close to the organization as well. So it's just navigating that is, and I've seen some balls drop and some bad things happen because of it, right? But being able to recoup in those moments and and redirect and just be honest with people, because we all have different issues that we're struggling with, not as an institution, but as individuals. And just coming to our patrons and our donors from that mindset has been helpful with me continuing and engaging in our relationships to move forward.
And I want to lift up something that Caitlin, you mentioned in some of your slides a few minutes ago about when it comes to doing the big math and the hard math and the everything else. And you put your first recommendation was just start. And we were fortunate to have a board chair about 4 years ago that his mantra was, what's not measured is not managed. And he really cleaned our clock on metrics and everything else. And it doesn't have to be difficult. But I will say that the journey can be so satisfying if you start actually looking at behavior data and everything else of your patrons, which is donor relationships. That is donor management, to really be looking at who is coming to what, how often are they coming, why are they coming? And then the next question is, who else looks like them in our database but hasn't made that gift yet? And if you just start those very basic things, you know, we started crawling 4 years ago on that, and then now we're all the way up to predictive analytics and looking at possibly using artificial intelligence in our database to serve up good patrons. And so it can happen really quickly if you'll just commit to scratching the surface and saying, okay, I've been in the mix and in the turmoil for so long. We have this national worldwide moment now where we can all stop for a second. You can stop for a day, right? And leave your emails for a day. You can leave your whatever for a day and say, I'm going to step back from it and look at something differently today. And I think that just taking that first step, and like you were saying, just start, is huge. And then the sky's the limit once you get a taste for that kind of work. I just wanted to lift that up. Not to be like a TRG infomercial, but it's good stuff.
Look, you're hired. Great. I love what you've described there, and where you're taking it is super exciting, right? When you really start to understand your patrons, and then you can actually turn some of it over to machine learning. I mean, there's really interesting work to be done in all of that.
I want to also jump in and just say that at True Colors, we were able to do some work with Emory, the MBA program, and we were able to develop brand personas. So quote unquote, to use a marketing term, but it's really just engagement personas and basically putting our patrons in buckets. And when they also put pictures and name to this, but I think you can actually do this internally as well too. And so, you know who your patron base is, you know, and then just being able to say a patron looks like this, or this, or this, and then being able to speak to them. And going back to your point, Caitlin, earlier, I know based upon certain buckets and demographics in our patron base, who would really watch a video, right? You can look at your email list and see who opens, who clicked on what. So you can really determine on if I can send this segment a video, or if I can send this segment a phone call to touch base, and figuring out just different ways to engage with your patron base based upon the data that you already have.
Hey, Anne, I'm going to ask you a question in front of everyone. Is that okay? I have observed from meetings with other organizations in theater and across the arts and cultural sector that everyone feels like they would benefit from seeing examples of what other people have done. As what Jamie, you know, people are asking Jamie for her FAQs. You all have designed beautiful campaigns. I'm wondering if we think it would be valuable here. So if you all think it's valuable, put a quick note in the chat. Would you have, and this is not just for our panelists, this is for people on the call, do you have things that you think that the rest of your colleagues here could learn from, take inspiration from, sample letters, emails, campaign plans, websites, pictures? And if you all think that would be helpful, could we send those to you, Anne? And could you include that as part of a follow-up? Is there a way to share? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering if we can share examples here.
Oh yeah, no, not on the spot at all. We definitely were already planning to send a recording of this call to everyone who signed up. And we can definitely include links to other resources that y'all want to share in that message. So definitely, I will drop my email in the chat as something to help, you can send them
Thank
to
you.
me.
Thank you for letting me do that without me telling you ahead of time. I'm so sorry, but I see people saying, oh God, I want to see that. What are you doing? What does it look like? And I would love to share that back out. Dan, thank you so much for saying yes. And anyone out there listening who has not raised their hand, you don't need to. If you have something stellar to share, send that to Anne and she'll send it back out. I think we're here about ready to wrap up unless there's one last question. I want to honor everyone's time and get you back to whatever is waiting for you in the rest of your lives. So I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for the time, the space, the attention, the grace that you showed with my children. I appreciate it. And the work that you do in our communities on behalf of a sector that I love so much is just really admirable through all of it. So thank you. I'm sure all of our guests have thank yous and goodbyes as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Caitlin. I'll just jump back on to close this out and say thank you so much to all of our panelists, to Caitlin, Jamie, Letitia. Thank you all at home for joining us and for being part of this great discussion. And big shout out to and thank you to our ASL team, Brandon and Manny. We are going to drop their information in the chat if you happen to be looking for ASL interpreters for your theater's future event. They're wonderful. And speaking of future things, we do have 2 other remote learning opportunities for you to take advantage of this week at TCG, and we'll also drop a link to that in the chat. We've got tomorrow, virtual content, business models, and earned revenue opportunities for mid-sized and small theaters. That's happening at 3 p.m. Eastern or 12 p.m. Pacific time. And then on Thursday this week, we have the Alchemy of High-Performing Organizations, which is going to be at 11 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. for West Coasters. So sorry about the early wake-up call. But yes, thank you again, everyone, for being here. It's always great to connect and learn more about our work together. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this out.